Hey, welcome to this interview with Dr. Brian Huffling. In the spirit of October and November, spooky season and ghosts and all of that, people celebrating Halloween and trick-or-treating, we have the opportunity to interview Dr. Huffling, who has been very proficient in doing research on paranormal, supernatural things, supernatural events going on, testimonies of UFOs, ghosts, the Mothman, and many other very curious, very unexplained events. And I'm really happy to have this opportunity to talk with you, Dr. Huffling. Thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. What got you interested in these subjects? It's mainly here in Latin America, to offer maybe a little bit of contrast. Pastors, people in general, Christians in general, are very afraid to touch upon the supernatural, the paranormal,
That's how it is
because,
here too. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they immediately go to this idea of, or mindset of, if you go into this, you're gonna open doors, you're gonna deal with the occult, and you're gonna expose yourself to evil supernatural
Yeah.
beings. What got you into this?
Well, I got into it kind of accidentally. So I like backyard astronomy and that kind of thing, and so I like reading about that. And I got into a couple of UFO books from Christian points of view. One from Ron Rhodes, The Truth About UFOs and that kind of thing. And I got one from Hugh Ross, which is Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. And what really got me interested in looking at this actually was what non-Christians were saying about it, or even anti-Christians, because I've always been taught as a Christian that aliens and all these things are really demonic in nature. So I kind of went along with that. Then I kind of wondered, well, why would demons care if we believe in aliens or not? So I started reading Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, and Hugh Ross was quoting, and others in that book were quoting these non-Christian thinkers and even anti-Christian thinkers who were really saying a lot of the same things that we're saying, namely that whatever these things are, and they didn't think they were alien either, but whatever they are very deceptive, and they want to control our worldview, and they want to control our thoughts. I thought that was really interesting for non-Christians to say, because we think the same thing about about demons, that they want to control our thoughts and they want to shape our worldview and this kind of thing. And if you look at a lot of the interaction that so-called contactees and abductees have with these beings, a lot of them are saying that, and they're not even just anti-religious, they're very anti-Christian, these beings, whatever they are. And they are... they oftentimes say things like, Jesus isn't God. He's just a normal person who's enlightened, or he's an alien himself, or whatever. And so these non-Christian ufologists, people who study UFOs and all stuff that pertains to UFOs, will say things like, I got a book over there. I'm gonna see it on my shelf over there. It's called Messengers of Deception. And that's written by an agnostic, Jacques Vallée, who's one of the leading ufologists around it. He worked with the Air Force, and he's one of the top researchers in that field. John Keel, who is a paranormal investigator, well known for the Mothman prophecies. These guys are saying, as well as John Allen Hynek, J. Allen Hynek, who was the top scientist for the Air Force during the 1950s and 60s for their own investigations into UFOs. Or saying things like, well, these really don't seem to be alien, but they're deceptive. They want to control your thoughts and your beliefs. And there's a very much a real paranormal aspect to all the stuff that surrounds UFOs. And so that got me interested in it, because I wanted to see, well, if non-Christians are saying this, maybe the Christians are onto something with this demon thing after all. And so, yeah, I started reading it, and as I guess luck or Providence would have it, I'm in the Air Force. I'm a reserve chaplain in the Air Force, and I did a master's degree for one of my programs to study with the Air Force, and they let me do my research project on UFOs and how they affect national security. And so I was able to do both my own personal research as well as research for the Air Force for my topic on that. So that's how I got into it, and just kind of been branching out ever since.
Interesting. So you're not just any wild person out there, just with a hat of aluminium and going around with that, right? You're actually a research funded by the American government to do research on this.
Well, I'm not funded to do research on this topic, but for
Okay.
my the degree I have, which is in military operational art and science, they let me do my research on this, and I'm going to take that research that I did, and I'm working on a book for that. But I do this for my own personal research with my theology and apologetics and philosophy and that kind of thing. So, but I do have that connection with the Air Force and that kind of thing. So yeah, I try to keep it academic and stay away from the people who are really tinfoil hat kind of people, and and keep it as legit as I possibly can.
Definitely, because well, to be completely honest with you, since I was young, I mean, when we watch these movies, Alien, all of these Predator and all of Hollywood movies about aliens and supernatural beings, The Conjuring and stuff, even though I've been always a Christian, I went from a very naive mindset of, yeah, all of this is demons. Everything is demons. And
Right.
then I went into, no, this might just conspiracy theories and hoax and stuff like that. But then actually what got me interested in this subject again was one of Michael Heiser's documentaries. I believe it was Demons and Aliens, that was just recently, like last year or 2 years ago, uploaded to YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Where Michael Heiser kind of postulated the same theory that these UFO events or paranormal events were actually demons that were controlling, or that were trying to, how do you say this, to change the way that we understand Christ as someone that is enlightened, but that they are the ones that sent Christ or stuff like that. It's been a while since I've seen that. How often is these how often is the figure of Christ in the testimonies that you've researched mentioned, where these supernatural beings, let's call them for the moment like that, they talk about him? Is it really often? Is it not that often? How is that the figure of Christ involved in this?
Yeah, so it's not uncommon. It doesn't happen all the time either, but it does happen. And when it does happen, I don't remember there ever being a case where they said that he was actually divine and God. Especially the earlier cases with the contactees. If you look at the Urantria books, and what the earlier contactees were saying. A contactee, if you guys don't know watching this, is someone who is in contact with these beings. They're not necessarily abductees where they're abducted or taken, but they have this kind of telepathic way of talking to these beings. If you look at just general research and studies on close encounters or abductions, you don't necessarily hear them talk about Christ a lot. But when you do hear them talk about Christ, and you look, especially more at the people who are closer to it, closer to the phenomena, they're more involved with it. I don't know of any case where there is a single one where they said that Jesus actually is God and you should follow him as if he were God, as portrayed by the Bible. In every single case, they say that either he's just an enlightened man, a good person, or again one of them. Or he's an alien that's trying to help us become enlightened. So I don't know statistically what the numbers would be. I don't hear the general population talking about their interaction with Christ with these beings. But if you look at the ones who are more contactee oriented or very, very close to the phenomena, not just had a little bit of contact here and there, but are very involved in it, that's where you really start seeing more of this discussion. And on the opposite side of that, you have people who call on the name of Christ. If you look at the research by people like Joe Jordan, who was a professional researcher for Mutual UFO Network, which is one of the top civilian organizations that research this. He came to know, in fact, he became a Christian through the study, and he said that people would have these experiences of these abductions, and he was always told that nothing could stop these experiences, but people would call out on the name of Christ, and they would stop. And this is why it doesn't make sense for the alien hypothesis to take account of all the data. And it also works for the cryptid events too, like Mothman, those kind of things where people will call out on the name of Christ. So you've got both sides. You've got the beings talking about Christ in a very non-biblical way, and you've also got their reaction to other Christians who call on the name of Christ, and it makes them leave them alone. So you have this kind of double-sided coin with that.
Yeah, that's what actually convinced me that this was there was something here, right? Mm-hmm. That there was actually something worth exploring, and that there was a supernatural event or supernatural dimension to these testimonies and stuff like that. Because again, before that, my mindset was always, this is projection, or how do you call this, where because I've had this experience before where you're kind of minutes or seconds before waking up, but your mind wakes up, but your body doesn't.
It's called, that's, some will call that, there's a phenomenon, it's depending on how it plays out, it could be either sleep paralysis. It could be vivid, there's a name for it, vivid isn't the right word, but vivid dreaming basically is what it is.
Yeah, when I was in college, when I was in college, I had two events separated where I had sleep paralysis. I didn't know what that was at the time. The first time was horrible for me because I started dreaming about these faces and demons and blood, and it was horrible. I remember that internally I started to pray. I started to ask for help to the Holy Spirit to proclaim the name of Jesus Christ. And eventually it disappeared, and I was able to wake up normally. And then I started researching what the heck is happening? What happened to me? And then I read about this sleep paralysis. And then one of the articles that I read said that this was very connected with testimonies of people that have been abducted. Mm-hmm. And for a time, that made sense to me that, that I experienced it. I know what it looks like. I can see someone believing that they were actually abducted, but it could be explained by this phenomenon or maybe another phenomenon that I don't know. But when I heard you and Michael Heiser and others say that people that were actually abducted, or testimonies of people that were actually abducted, call upon the name of Christ, and that stopped the event, I was like, hold on. This is not just something of like sleep paralysis. This is something else. Because, for example, in my case, it didn't happen immediately. The sleep paralysis didn't stop when I started praying. It took a little while. But yeah, I mean, the testimonies that you've read, are these people agnostics, atheists, or does it happen more to Christians that have experiences of abduction or contact? Or is it more on the side of people that don't hold to any religion at all?
You've got a smattering of both. And going back to your discussion fast about sleep paralysis, I'm looking at so Susan Clancy has a book called Abducted, How People Come to Believe They Are Kidnapped by Aliens. And she's arguing mainly for her sleep paralysis. And that may explain some things. But as you said, it doesn't seem to account for all the data, like what you mentioned with the paranormal aspect of this. But looking at your most recent question, there are people all over the place who have these experiences of being abducted or being seeing a UFO or having a paranormal experience. A lot of researchers and Christians as well, but even non-Christians like John Keel, who I would say is very anti-Christian, says that if you start opening yourself up to these occult doors, basically, then you're doing just that. You're inviting these phenomena to come into your life. He experienced that with his investigation of Mothman, for example. But you do have people who are Christians who see UFOs. You do have people who are atheists or whatever, and they see things. A lot of Christians believe and have researched that if you are having these closer encounters, there probably is some door that has been opened by you or a loved one, for example, or somebody. And Joe Jordan says this too, that you've got children, for example, having this experience of these shadowy figures in their bedrooms, for example, and they're not doing anything in the occult, but maybe their parents did, or maybe an uncle did. It's hard to tell if that's always the case. It might not be always the case, but it's often the case that happens where you got someone practicing something in the occult. But of course, if you do, then you're opening that door even more. But you have non-Christians and Christians alike who are having these experiences. But I think that people who are having these more closer encounters, the darker experiences, are in some way having that door opened somehow.
Now, perhaps it will be good for the audience to understand, what does opening a door mean?
Okay.
And how do you actually open a door? Because in a small parenthesis here, Halloween just was 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that both people in the US and in my experience here in Latin America, people are all over the place on Halloween. And some of the discussions that I've had sometimes say that even if you dress up as something neutral, or a princess or a cowboy or whatever, if you involve yourself or give candy, you're opening a door to the occult and supernatural.
Yeah.
Would this be the case, or what actually helps us open a door to the occult?
So if you look at the history of Halloween, and I've done some interviews with this for my own channel, is Halloween in the U.S. and maybe in Mexico as well is a very commercialized holiday, and there can certainly be dark aspects to it. But when I talk about a door, I'm talking about something that is more intentional in terms of the occult nature, like playing with an Ouija board, or going to see a psychic, or in some way seeking out an experience, or seeking out the spiritual dimension of these things. But there also are ways where that can happen where you're not necessarily doing that. So, for example, there's been a study with the U.S. government about a place in Utah here called Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know if you've heard of Skinwalker Ranch or not. It's a hotbed of paranormal activity in, I think it's northeast Utah. So much so that a UFO enthusiast who is very wealthy, named Robert Bigelow, bought the area. It was a ranch. And the government actually did some research on it, and they would go there and they would do their research and go back home. And then they would start having these effects happen at home. And so their wives and their children would see things. They would see these dark figures. They would see these orbs of light in their houses and everything. And so that came to be known as the hitchhiker effect. One of the researchers called it the hitchhiker effect. So it doesn't have to be apparently where you're going out and doing something intentionally sinister, but just being around that. But they were still researching it intentionally. So there's some aspects of that there. But just going there and doing that, in that instance, opened the door. So there's different ways that can happen. Whether it's paranormal investigation. So if you're going to try to do that, you want to study ghosts, for example, and you go to someone's supposed haunted house and you go in their attic and you got all the Ghostbuster type stuff or whatever. That evidently can lead to these kinds of experiences, or something like going to see a psychic or a medium, for example, trying to contact the dead, for example, is a really big door to those kind of experiences. I would personally say that I don't think that Halloween trick-or-treating would do that. There are different views on that, but certainly the other areas can.
All right. Yeah. No, definitely. I agree with the intentional part. I've always tried to maintain myself, obviously, and recommend everybody that I know to maintain themselves away from all of these aspects of that have this spiritual component. Why do you think humans have this kind of ability to open doors? Would this be an argument for a spiritual soul dimension of humanity?
I think it probably could be in a very interesting way. I mean, we are spiritual beings, or we're a spiritual material composite, a unified essence, I would argue, of spirit and body. And so we long for things that are not merely material. And so I think this is where materialism and atheism fail, because they cannot explain why we have this desire for the spiritual life, the God, the spiritual virtues and things that are not material in nature. And if you look throughout history, just from an anthropological historical study, there are people all around the world and throughout history who have had all kinds of weird paranormal type experiences, and the materialist view doesn't account for that. So I think that can be an argument for why there actually is a spiritual world. And that would probably, I think, also somehow could be an argument for the soul as well.
Good. Now, before going into the questions of the chapter directors, the Reasonable Faith chapter directors that we haven't touched, I don't know if this question makes sense or not, or if it's possible to answer or not, but how up does it go? Because, for example, if you work for the Air Force, and this has been researched not only by you, but other people related to the government, could we say that the government or officials or something know about this spiritual dimension and just have kept it silence for the public, or what do you think
that has been one of the main debates ever since this started. The UFO phenomena is not new, but it is seen to be new in kind of the modern era, starting with the ushering of World War II, especially with atomic weapons. I have a book back, I guess it's over there now, put out by the Air Force. I can read it. I have a snippet on my computer if you want me to read it to you, but it says in 1969, the year that the Air Force completed its study or stopped the official study of Project Blue Book, that looking at UFO investigations and the phenomenon itself is very much like what you would see with the occult, parapsychology, and even demonic possession. And so it's incontrovertible, it's beyond dispute at this point, that the government has known that there is an aspect of ufology and all of this that is very connected to the spiritual. And what's even more interesting in that, or at least is interesting, is that the government has tried to, this is just so funny, the government has tried to harness this paranormal power, if you want to call it that, by trying to use it for its own motivation. So, for example, the CIA, and this is documented, this is not a conspiracy theory, this is just point of fact at this point, has done research on parapsychology, remote viewing, which is where you're in one location which you can see telepathically other places. They've done research on telepathy. They have done research on all sorts of things like this, kind of these parapsychological events. And so there's no question that the U.S. government, and I'm sure other governments around the world as well, recognize and believe that there is a spiritual element to this. If you read Lou Elizondo's new book that came out this past summer, and he was in the middle of all this discussion with the American government and UFOs, they recognize this. Lou doesn't like the religious aspect of it, but he recognizes that there is a paranormal side because he claims to be a remote viewer trained by the U.S. government. And the guys who were doing the investigation on Skinwalker Ranch, for example, there's no dispute. If you read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, the whole book was to highlight the underlying paranormal aspect of not just UFOs, but Skinwalker Ranch and all of these kind of things. So there's really no question at this point that the government is aware that there is a spiritual paranormal aspect to it. They've known about it for decades, and they've even tried to harness it.
Interesting. I mean, that opens the door to so many things now.
Yeah, it gets weird fast.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect it getting weird so fast, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Quick question. How would you define paranormal, and how would you differentiate that from supernatural? Or
That's a great question. So supernatural, I think, and we're trying to be very, very exact in our terminology, some of us prefer to leave supernatural only to God and only apply that term to God, because if you talk about, if you want to use those words very, very carefully, the only thing above nature, well, angels and demons, even though they're spiritual, are still considered nature. They're natural. They're effects of a cause of God. So if you want to be very, very precise in that, some of us like to say that the only supernatural being that is technically above nature is God. If you want to include the angels and demons and those kind of things that are part of nature. Now, some people want to say, yeah, but that's not normal. So maybe they're super normal or paranormal, in that we don't normally have interaction with angels and demons on a daily basis. So when one does have a weird interaction with one, that's considered paranormal or outside of the normal activities that we normally would experience. So you can go either way with that. So in any event, it's going to be something that's not ordinary. It's extraordinary for our own experiences, I guess. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a great distinction. Thank you. Now, I promise, before we go into the questions of the chapter directors, and probably we'll unravel all of this. It's all connected, obviously. But for example, you mentioned the Skinwalker Ranch, which was in Utah, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just recently saw your latest video on the Mothman and a Mothman event, right? That was in Virginia, right?
That was in West Virginia, yeah.
Why do you think that these kinds of phenomena are localized to one point? And because if they're spiritual, they can move all over around, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, for example, why don't we see the Mothman here in Mexico or in Mexico City, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think they're localized?
Question. I think biblically you can maybe make a case that there are certain principalities or powers that do have a geographical kind of, if you want to kind of cut up in a military style way of looking at it, that there are hierarchies of angels and demons as well that may have certain localities that they are assigned to. Maybe other answers to that question would say that some places are just more hotbeds of these of occultic type practices. So, for example, the Skinwalker Ranch is tied to Indian witchcraft type practices and occultism, that kind of thing. So some people will say that, well, these events they have the door open because they are already involved in these very dark kind of witchcrafts, occultic, pagan kinds of things that just naturally open that door already. I don't know what the reason would have been in West Virginia with Mothman for that, because there doesn't seem to be an obvious connection there. You got the Flatwoods Monster 2 hours east of where most of Mothman stuff happened. You got the UFO encounter there. And there are places where you see more and more, you see higher number of UFO encounters and that kind of thing. And that could be for any number of reasons, whether there's a more opening door of people being involved in occult type stuff, or possibly that, again, you have these beings who are, lack of a better way of putting it, kind of assigned to these places that we see in the Bible, principalities and powers restricting travel for different other angelic beings as well. I think either one of those are probably legitimate answers. You do happen to see things, though, around the world. You do happen to see, so Mothman is a cryptid. He's basically a being with a man figure, has the appearance of a bird in his head and wings. You do see that around the world. In fact, I do think actually in Mothman prophecies, I think that John Keel maybe mentioned Mexico, but it's somewhere in, I believe, Latin America. But even if he didn't, there are cases of these kind of cryptid creatures all over the world, Bigfoot, these kind of things. So you do see them, but there do seem to be hotbeds in certain places.
Yeah, interesting. Because, for example, in Mexico, I don't know if we would consider. I've not researched a lot on Mothman. I've seen a couple of videos on it.
Yeah, he's mostly concerned. You see him more in the West Virginia, Ohio basin, river basin. Yeah. Yeah,
from what I've seen and the imagery that goes with this story of Mothman in Mexico, I guess in the whole country. There are stories about people that can transform into animals, and this is connected to ancient Aztecs or indigenous people.
That would be like Skinwalker. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I've heard testimonies of Christians, of missionaries, that when they are going to preach or to share the gospel to far regions of the country that haven't been reached with the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
They've encountered people that can transform into animals, or that perhaps in the middle of the night when they're going in the road, they've seen a person. I remember this testimony of someone that they were going to this mission trip, and they saw far away a person in the middle of the road, and then suddenly he just sprung out wings and flew away.
Okay.
And they are called in Spanish, I guess, or the indigenous language, they're called nahuales here. That's how usually we know them. And to be completely honest with you, since I've never seen that, I'm somewhat skeptical about it.
Sure,
but I'm not close to the possibility of that, because all of these testimonies and everything that's going on, your research that I'm just getting familiarized with, it's been pretty interesting that this is happening all over the world.
Yeah, it is. You hear these kind of things and you think that's crazy, but you talk to people. In fact, I did a couple of interviews with Mothman eyewitnesses when I was up there for the festival a few weeks ago, and you read the accounts, you talk to people who have experienced it, and it's very similar to what we see in Christianity. There's oftentimes no benefit to making up these stories and have almost completely negative effects for coming out. That's why a lot of folks, so we have like 100, there are 100 or more testimonies of Mothman reports that went to the police, and there were a lot more that didn't, because they didn't want to get involved with all the, being called crazy and all that kind of thing. So if you look at a lot of testimonies, you hear this. It sounds crazy, but you'd have a lot of people making these claims. And what you just mentioned sounds like if it's a shapeshifter, it's like they'd be like Skinwalker Ranch or Skinwalker, and that comes out of the Indian tradition here in the U.S., where basically you have the witch doctor who can put a curse on something and make it a Skinwalker, or cause a Skinwalker. And so that wouldn't be in this case, it wouldn't be a human transforming; it would be a paranormal being that has the ability to change form in that regard. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Do you think
Sounds
that
crazy, but there's a lot of that testimony going on.
yeah. No, it's not your usual story.
No, that's not normal. Yeah.
A conversation in your Christian dinner, right? Do you think that perhaps stories like the werewolves, vampires, and stuff like that could have roots in these kinds of things?
That's a great question, and like I said, the UFO phenomena is not new. What's interesting about it is that it changes its form. So you can tell, again, if you look at research for like Jacques Vallée or John Keel, people who've researched this in other cultures and folklore, what we describe as aliens abducting people is not very different from the elves of, say, Ireland and around those places, the little people, the fairy people. I didn't even know that fairies, you hear about fairy tales. I didn't realize that people actually believed that there were fairies, real fairies, until I started getting into ufology and this kind of thing. But these fairy tales are beliefs of people who really hold that there are fairies and gnomes and these kind of weird creatures that existed. If you trace that back, you look at these other accounts, like with these demonic accounts, we would call them, like with the incubus and succubus of these spirits. Well, could that have been a manifestation? We see these kind of manifestations possibly with what we call now vampires and werewolves and whatever. If it's the case that demons can take on certain forms and make us think, for example, that they're aliens, or that there's a skinwalker or a Mothman or a Bigfoot or whatever, then there's nothing really stopping them from taking on a different kind of form that we would consider to be just as crazy, like a werewolf or a vampire. So I don't think that werewolves and vampires, I'm not saying these things exist as vampires or werewolves, but it does seem that it's fitting the pattern that the supernatural can play in trying to shape your worldview. So people today don't normally hold to vampires and werewolves a lot in the mainstream, but there are a lot of people who hold to aliens. And so we see these views of aliens and beliefs of aliens going back to, earliest you see in human history. So that's always been there, the space people and that kind of thing. The question is do these beings that are taking on the facade of aliens, are those the same beings that took on the facade of something else like vampires and werewolves? And again, if you look at Jacques Vallée's research on this, for example, Passport to Magonia is a great book to read on that, because it looks at how different cultures viewed these kinds of things. So it's possible that these demons took on various facades or personas. You got the cover of Vallée's book where you got an alien holding up a mask of some other kind of being. Is it possible these are the same beings just taking different forms and masks? It doesn't seem impossible, and as long as the underlying motivation is the same, that is to change people's worldviews and take them away from Christ, then that would be a good motivation to do that for them.
All right, I have a question about that, but let me read one of the questions of the chapter directors here.
Sure.
What are the specific criteria that one would use to determine the authenticity of a photograph or a recording or a print attributed to a zoological creature? How do you ensure that this is not a fake or a misrepresented natural phenomena?
So that's changed over time with the advent of digital photography and videography. Back in the 60s and that time when you had manual cameras that used actual film, what they would want to do in that time was, if they could, examine the actual camera, examine the negatives, examine the film, the actual pictures, and be able to tell if there's any kind of tinkering with that. With the advent of digital means to record and take pictures, that has changed a lot. But there a lot of the same principles still apply, and that is, you want to make sure there's nothing in the picture or the video that is out of place. So if you've got something flying through the scene, does it cause shadows? Or is there any irregularities that should or shouldn't be there? And those kind of things. But it's so hard to fake. It's so easy to fake these. I have faked people out on purpose with just an app I have, just my friends playing around on Facebook, because you can take this an app I downloaded from the iOS store, the Apple store, and make it look like a UFO came in my backyard. And these and that's just me playing around. That's not talking about professional people who have these skills to manipulate film and pictures. So it's almost gotten to the point now where someone's got a picture or a video and it's almost irrelevant, because, well, anybody can fake anything now. But there are certain criteria. So, for example, with the military videos that came out, are you familiar with the Navy videos that came out from 2004 and 15 that were leaked in 2017 by the New York Times, that were taken from Navy airplanes, Navy aircraft?
Perhaps I've watched them, but I'm not familiar with them.
There were videos that have been leaked from the Pentagon by naval aviators who have seen what we now are going to call UFOs. In fact, they're probably some of the best cases we have, and they are videos. And so what they would look for would be multiple sensor data points, like being able to see it visually with the pilot's eyes, being able to see it on the camera. Is it hitting on the radar? Or are there multiple, to use our resurrection terminology, are there multiple attestations to these things? Do they give you the right kind of signature regarding heat and light and that kind of thing? It's difficult to ascertain now just from a picture or a video, because it's so easy to fake the stuff. But back before all that was as easy to do, you would look for look at the actual camera, the film, the negatives, that kind of thing. But you also can take these to specialized experts to be able to tell, okay, there's, it flies in front of this power line where it should have gone behind the power line, that kind of thing. So.
All right. Okay. Well, for example, going back again to the UFO example and the UFO phenomenon, I don't remember where or when I saw this, but there's been the idea that these can't be actual aliens or actual extraterrestrial beings, because the physics that would take for a ship to come from another galaxy, let's say,
Right.
and then reach here and then maintain its anonymity. It's impossible. It's physically impossible for an actual alien or ship to be here. So would you say that when there is a real case of actual UFO sighting or abduction, all of the real, or what we would consider the real events, are spiritual events of demons or something like that?
Yeah, I think that we're normally seeing that. We have the now probably less than 5%. Depending on the area you look at, it could be as high as 25% or more. Like when the Air Force was investigating, they couldn't explain 20% of 12,700 cases. That's a lot of cases. Now we have, maybe a smaller number that are unexplained, but there's still a high number of just actual cases that are unexplained. And yeah, there's a huge debate in this in astrophysics about can beings travel from millions of light years away. The closest galaxy to us is 2.2 million light years away. It's the Andromeda Galaxy. And so, but maybe they're coming from our own galaxy in a different star system. But even that would be incredibly hard to do. And that's also not to say anything to the effect of the kind of things these ships seem to do also seem to be physically impossible. Like they will materialize and dematerialize. They'll make right angle turns, 180-degree turns at going thousands of miles an hour. They will change their shape. They will change their color. They will morph in and out of other ships. So there are people trying to figure that out. And again, in Lou Elizono's new book, Imminent, he cites I guess he's a physicist. His name is Hal Puthoff, who claims to have been able to solve this mathematically. The problem with that, in my view, and I'm not a mathematician or a physicist in this regard, is that you can make math do almost anything. Stephen Hawking is famous for trying to show that reasonable faith is Bill Craig's organization. He's very well known for the Kalam cosmological argument, which shows there's a beginning of the universe. Well, Hawking doesn't like that because it shows that if there's a beginning, there must be a beginner. So he wanted to show that the math can tell us that we can explain that there is no beginning. And he was successful at that until you plug in the actual data of the real world, in which case you get the singularity of the Big Bang again. So the theory behind all that, the math behind all that is nice and everything. Again, that's not my area, so it's hard for me to critique it. But it's easy to make math do what you want it to do, like statistics. So when you see these ships coming, and it's interesting that they're not all the same size or shape. You've got spherical ones, oval ones, square ones, big ones, small ones. They're coming from different places. The beings themselves, I've heard 20-something different kind of species of these aliens. You got the reptilians, the Greys, the Nordics. They're very, very different. And if you look at this from an atheistic point of view, it's a serious problem. Adding more sentient beings like this, people will say this is a problem for Christianity. It's really a problem for atheism. Because as Stephen Davis says, Paul Davies says that adding more of these kinds of beings actually is going to show that there's more credibility for and he's an atheist for theism. And Jacques Vallée, who is at best probably an agnostic, says that if you're just looking at this from a naturalistic point of view, the chances of another species of being that are intelligent, that have the same basic anatomical structure as us, a head, arms, legs, that can see on the same wavelength spectrum, light spectrum, that can hear the same thing, it's just not going to happen. So you have these atheists who are undercutting their own atheism by saying if there are these aliens, then that's harmful for their view. Now, Vallée and them, they don't think that there are aliens. They take it to be another interdimensional kind of theory. They're not Christians. But I think, again, taking all the data together, looking at the problems of the alien view, and Vallée gives several arguments for why they're not aliens, coupled with the paranormal aspect and coupled with the anti-Christian aspect of it, makes it more likely to be demonic.
But, for example, in the case of taking that into account, if they show up and open this door to the supernatural, wouldn't it count against them? Wouldn't the demons want people to remain atheists or skeptics or stuff like that, rather than displaying themselves and showing, basically providing reasons for them to believe that there's a supernatural aspect of the world? Wouldn't it count against what they're trying to do?
Possibly. I mean, I think as long as demons are taking people away from Christ, they don't care what you are. I mean, you've got demons. I think, for example, you look at Islam. You look at Muhammad thought he was being oppressed by demons until his wife convinced him otherwise. It probably was demons. You got these, you probably demonic entities in Mormonism. You see these visions in Mormonism. You get all these different views in other religions. I don't know if they care about us being atheists pretty much, as long as we're not Christians. Now, they don't care if we worship Allah. They don't care if we worship, whatever the Mormon church wants us to worship, as long as it's not the real Christ. So if they can show up and say, look, we're your enlightened brothers, cosmologically speaking, are in the universe, follow us. Your religions are really obsolete. In fact, that's what Valley says, is while he doesn't think that they're aliens, he thinks that these beings, when they come here, when they express themselves and appear, that he says that our religious beliefs and churches and all that seem obsolete because now we have a bigger issue. And it does raise questions. I don't think it proves Christianity false, even if there were aliens. But these beings tend to make people question their faith. So if you look at the unidentified documentary on History Channel with Louis Elizondo again, one Christian said he was deployed in the desert and he saw what he called a UFO, and he said it was a real faith shaker. So seeing these UFOs and these aliens or whatever, they do make people question their faith. And I think as long as we're doing that, they're happy.
Well, that's a good point. I remember that there was this college professor, and he was very fond of the how do you call Ancient Aliens?
The TV show.
The TV show from History Channel. And at some point, he did mention that he thought that Jesus was these kinds of supernatural being that came from aliens and stuff like that. So it makes sense that as long as they are taking you away from Christ, they don't care.
Yeah, no, you don't care. Yeah.
Good. Now, for example, how do you ensure that your research is free or confirmatory bias? What steps do you take to avoid looking only for evidence that confirm a pre-existing hypothesis?
That's a great question, and I think it's the same as any view I want to hold to. Is what are the best arguments against my position? So, what if I'm researching this and I think that this is a demonic view? What are the best arguments against it? What are people saying? So, if I want to, I wasn't looking to promote the demonic view. I actually was kind of irritated by it because this is what every Christian says. Kind of it's like the Sunday school answer. But you look at all the evidence. You look at all the evidence and see, okay, well, where does the evidence go? And as these, again, non-Christians are saying, you've got to look at the evidence, and there are certain, as Gary Habermas says, these minimal facts for the resurrection. There are also these minimal facts with ufology that are pretty much undeniable at this point, that people are having experiences, they're reporting things, they're seeing X, Y, and Z. So what theory explains all of that? Well, it doesn't seem to be aliens, it doesn't seem to be hoaxes and all that kind of thing, but the paranormal one does tend to account for the sightings, for the anti-Christian bias itself, for the paranormal aspects of it as well. And so that's the theory that I think that accounts for most of the data. And then you want to look and see, okay, are there any outlying issues that I'm not taking into account, or anything that would contradict my own theory? And you just got to look for it. And it's kind of a never-ending. You're always researching, always looking, but you can't not have a theory forever. You got to at some point form a working hypothesis. And if you find something that doesn't fit, like any scientific paradigm, you have to adjust that. But I think right now, where I am in my own research and looking at other people's as well, is that the demonic paranormal and hypothesis explains most of the data.
I see. Okay. Well, we're approaching the 1 hour mark. I don't know how much time do you have. I don't want to take so much of your time.
I'm fine. Whatever you want to do. Yeah, I'm good.
Jim. All right. I think we could go for another 20, 30 minutes. Does that sound good?
Sure. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, for example, I don't know if you heard. Let me see if I can share my screen really, really quick. because there was actually a very, very controversial, um, a very controversial event recently on Mexico because of I don't know if you can see my screen right now, because there
Well, let me
was.
pull this up.
Let me see here.
Oh yeah, I can't see. Oh yeah, I've seen that. It came out
Yeah.
last July.
Yeah, exactly. On
Well, 2023.
this mummy kind of shaped thing that was
Mhm.
presented in the Congress of Mexico. This was really, really popular.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you researched that? Where did
I
it
have
go?
a little bit, and the research that I did on it showed that they were actually disproven before they even brought them out. And some of the naval aviators, like Ryan Graves, for example, this all came out last July of 2023 when they were having a congressional hearing, and they had Ryan Graves, David Fravor, and David Grush, all part of the military, saying that there are good reasons for thinking that there are UFOs and even aliens. And so then they brought these things out. And the research I did on it, which was not a lot, but what I looked up indicated that these were pretty much forgeries from Peru, and they were brought from Peru, and that they had known to be forged before they even broke the story, and they have been disproven several times. So that's what I've researched on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's most similar to some stuff that I've heard. But yeah, I mean, I guess you can. Well, some people. Let me put it like this: some people have said that the government is actually trying to prepare us through these kind of events
And disclosure,
disclosure,
right.
or movies or stuff like that. That they're trying to prepare us for a big reveal when they show that there is actually life on other planets or stuff like that.
Trying
What
to
do you think of
desensitize
that?
us.
Yeah, what do you think of
So
that?
this has gone back since 1953. So back in 1953, the CIA sat down with the Air Force, and according to the CIA, back then, this is after World War II, just during the Red Scare of communism with Russia and everything. Now Russia, and the CIA said we want to desensitize people to all of this, and so what we want to do is enlist Hollywood and Disney and all these different organizations and medias to make all this seem somewhat normal. And the reason they wanted to make it normal was so people would stop freaking out and stop clogging the network of communication in case there really is an attack from Russia.
Okay.
You know, some of these disclosure theories, I can see why they make the argument. It seems to me that the government does know things that it's not telling us, either about their what to know about so-called UFOs or the parapsychological nature of them. But the main thing I think government wants to keep us from knowing is our data collecting methods. So I don't. The government's being pushed by whistleblowers, again, like Lou Elizondo and Dave Fravor and these guys. So it seems very reluctant. They seem very reluctant to want to come out with these, and they come out just enough, unless even the whistleblowers themselves are part of the disclosure, which it doesn't really seem like that's happening. I don't tend to think that's what's going on, some kind of a government conspiracy disclosure, because they've from day one the government's been very tight-lipped on this and not wanting to get all this out. And even now, I think that's the case, that they're wanting to keep all this pretty much hush-hush and closed up. I personally, it's my personal opinion, I don't think that's what's happening. But I can see why some people would, because there has been this kind of incremental letting loose of the data. I mean, you have the 2017 release of these Navy fighters stories and videos of 2004 and 15 events. Then you have in 2021, you have the Director of National Intelligence coming out with a report about all this. They were forced to by President Trump and the government as part of our overall National Defense Authorization Act. So they're being kind of, in my view, made to do it, but I can see why you can take this incremental
Mhm.
disclosure, I guess, and see that there's an intentionality to it. I don't think there is, but I can see a lot of people would think that.
I see. Okay. Now, for example, in one of your videos, you quoted John Keel saying, and I quote, "Any acceptable theory must offer an explanation for all the data. The paraphysical hypothesis meets this criterion. The extraterrestrial hypothesis does not." First question, what is exactly the difference between the paraphysical hypothesis and the extraterrestrial hypothesis?
So extraterrestrial is just alien, that there are other beings coming from wherever, and that has changed with our understanding of the universe. So first they came from Venus, then they came from Mars, and then further out in the solar system. Now they're coming from other star systems themselves, because we know that there aren't these beings on Venus and Mars and whatever else. So the extraterrestrial view is just the alien view. The parapsychological view, or the whole thing, can be interpreted differently by various people. So you've got, for example, J. Allen Hynek, who again was the top scientist for the Air Force for Project Blue Book. He held to a psychic aspect to this phenomena, where it wasn't probably physical, but it was something like we encounter with the poltergeist activity, where you've got a non-physical thing causing a physical effect. You got Jacques Vallée, who again doesn't think that these are aliens, but he thinks that these are physical beings and that can manipulate space and time, but they can cause projections on our minds. For example, you got John Keel, you just read, who thinks that again these are not aliens, but they some kind of an energy, and they can manipulate these our views and the light spectrum and things to make us believe certain things. So also the whole spectrum of ufology would include telepathy, remote viewing, what now is considered parapsychological. So the parapsychological view, or paraphysical view, as I think you said in the quote, can be understood in various ways, but it's going to be distinct from the alien view into being more of a parapsychological view, where there's something more psychological and psychic. Not psychic necessarily in the sense of for foretelling the future, but psychic in the sense of being able to control things with an intelligence.
All right. Okay. I want to delve into that a little bit, but before doing that, is there any evidence or data that the paraphysical or parapsychological hypothesis does not explain?
Well, I think that you would have to be able to explain the apparent. So either the alien view or these immaterial, spiritual, parapsychological views have difficulty, because if you got the alien view, for example, you've got to figure out how do you explain all these poltergeist things that were going on in the middle of these events. So when someone sees a UFO, especially if it's a close encounter, how do you explain the bottle of wine coming flying off the shelf, flying across the room? How do you explain all these ghostly encounters, or the list goes on with all these paranormal things that happen. If you go to a paranormal view, how do you explain the apparent physicality of these things? Like they do sometimes, not always, but sometimes ping on radar, or you can see them, you can sometimes hear them, not often, but you sometimes can hear them. People will claim to have felt them, or these kind of things. So either theory has to explain something that's difficult. For the parapsychological or paraphysical view, the hardest part, I think, of that theory is to explain the apparent physicality of what we see in some of the phenomena. Now, I say apparent because it's debated as to whether there really is anything physical, because again, you've got people saying that these craft and these beings are doing things that you really can't do from a normal physical point of view, like traveling 1,000 miles an hour and just stopping on a dime, or starting from nothing and going to 17,000 miles an hour immediately, changing shape, all these kind of things. So are they really physical, or do they just appear physical? Did they really touch something, or do they just appear to have touched something? And they got people again like Joe Jordan, who were having these interviews of people who were being abducted, and the person's claiming to be abducted at that very moment, and he pretty much passes out, his body stays there, but he says he was taken to a ship. You got people like, what's the guy's name who wrote Communion? Whitley Strieber, who says he was taken somewhere to a ship. Was it bodily? Was it whatever? You've got Paul saying, was he taken to heaven bodily or not? So we got to investigate what is the actual nature of the phenomena. Is there any physical aspect to it, and if so, how do we account for that if you hold to an immaterial view? But it does seem like we have scriptural basis for saying that angels can cause physical effects. We have angels, for example, in Genesis 19 causing blindness. We have the demons possessing people and pigs, that kind of thing. And it does seem to be the case that you have immaterial beings that can cause physical things. Again, these paranormal events. I think we're looking at demonic activity, not ghostly activity, when it comes to hearing footsteps or seeing, lights turning on or bottles of wine flying across the room. People who are otherwise very sane and they having these experiences after they, go and visit Skinwalker Ranch or whatever. Is your
Interesting.
question?
Yes, definitely, okay. And it creates a good pathway to the next question, because
okay.
I guess I could divide it in two parts, because there seems to be a physical aspect of this, and the first one, and I guess you touched a little bit on it. I guess it gets us into the philosophical discussion about the interaction between what's physical and non-physical. Right. Has there been any? Because, for example, I guess we understand that God is not physical, obviously, but he has effects on the world. So I don't see, well, for me, again, as a Christian, I don't see it difficult to think that a spiritual being can have interaction with the physical world. Well, the first part of the question is, have there been any hypothesis, for example, on the secular world, to explain this, or is it just like mental, as you mentioned, that they want to throw everything in mentally, psychologically, and that's it?
Yeah. So you mentioned Keel. Keel's view is that, in a great book that he has written on this, is called Operation Trojan Horse: The Classic Breakthrough Study of UFOs. And he, again, doesn't think these are aliens, but he doesn't think that they're really physical either. But they are at some level energy, and they can manipulate our physical space-time world. There's some intelligence behind all this, making us believe that these things are physical or whatever. So he has his view. Jacques Vallée does think they're physical, but think that these are beings that can manipulate space and time, but can also have psychic effects on people and actually cause projections. That's very interesting, because we also have some of that, from what I understand, from Thomas Aquinas, who believes that demonic forces can actually cause us to have certain phantasms, what he would consider mental pictures. That's very interesting to have Aquinas and Vallée say the same thing, and they're very radically different in their overall views on theology. So yes, there are attempts at secular explanations. The question is how much of the data they really take into consideration. I think that the demonic spiritual view takes in more data than even Keel's view does, because Keel's view doesn't, in my view, take into consideration the very anti-Christian aspect of this, and in terms of them saying that Christ is nothing more than a man or whatever. And also it doesn't take into consideration why they react the way they do at the name of Jesus.
Is it just anti-Christian, or has there been any mention of Buddhism or Islam, Moses?
Yeah, so a lot of these people who were contacting these, like Stephen Greer, who's very popular nowadays with this, they are teaching a lot. These beings they're trying to communicate through the contactees a very Eastern Buddhistic worldview, that there really is no God, but there's enlightenment, and so we're trying to help you humans become more enlightened, keep you from blowing yourself to smithereens with your new weapons, and let you become more like us. I do think that there are, in some ways, anti-religious views, because they're trying to say, at least in some cases, they're not very consistent, and the beings' messages change. Again, like as Vallée says, these are deceptive beings, they're messengers of deception, and their views change, their messages change based on what we learn and know. And so for some people, it's going to be somewhat anti-religious in the sense that, well, we need to get beyond religion, but especially anti-Christian in that they're very much against Christ.
Okay. Has there, going back again into the interaction of the physical and the non-physical, have there been any spacecraft? Because I know that there's also testimonies or stories about crashes and planes or human aircraft pursuing these aircrafts that are also UFOs, I guess. Have there been actual spacecraft, physical spaceships that have been discovered?
Well, that's debatable. So we have the first, at least main one, would be Roswell back in July or so of 1947. Interestingly, the first report, the Air Force at that time, the Army Air Corps, the Air Force wasn't born for a couple more months after that. So the Air Force inherited this right out of the gate. The first report that the Army Air Corps said when there was and no one disputes there was a crash at Roswell. They disputed about what it was. But the first thing the Army Air Corps said was it was a disc. Isn't that weird? Hours later, they said that, no, it's not a disc, it's a weather balloon. And that story kind of held sway until about 1978 or 79, when you've had a couple other ufologists interviewing some of the eyewitnesses of Roswell. And then we really get the conspiracy theory happening after that. In the mid-1990s, the Air Force said that, okay, they weren't weather balloons, they were spy balloons or spying to see if Russia was detonating atomic weapons. So David Grush and others have said that we do actually possess some kind of craft. He would not say whether he had seen them or not. And there's not been anything incontrovertible about it. So there have been cases where you've got people saying, yeah, we've got craft over at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or we've got craft here and there. There's nothing that's come out where people could study it and see it. It's all hearsay. Mm-hmm. So do we have crashed craft? Well, there are people who say we do, but there's nothing I think where we can go and look at it and test it and investigate it. So it depends on what you want to believe.
All right. Okay. I like that answer. Do you think that spiritual beings, demonic beings, would be able to create aircraft that the government has stored somewhere so that...
That's like another question. The word create, no. From nothing, no. Create from matter or manipulate matter, possibly. Because, I don't think that other beings can create from nothing, but I do think it's possible that we can maybe manipulate matter. And it might be the case, and I have no proof for this, but it could be the case that spiritual forces might be able to manipulate matter in such a way. The only thing I would say as proof would be to I'm trying to think of an example where that may have happened, but we know that they can. I believe that these spirits can manipulate matter. Can they shape matter is a different question. Like, can they take matter and make it look like an aircraft or something? I don't know if I can think of an example of that. It's an interesting question. And one of my principles that I use in these discussions is that we cannot change what we do know based on what we don't know. So we really don't know if the government really has anything that we would consider alien spacecraft.
Okay.
So
I see.
I don't think we should go changing our theology and stuff based on conspiracy theories about what David Grush says or about what other people say about Roswell. Until they say, here it is, come look at it and come investigate it, there's nothing really to explain yet. It's all hearsay.
All right. Well, I just have just a couple of questions, and then we can go closing. Going back into the relationship between UFOs and abductions and contact, you've also quoted John Keel saying that victims of demonomania suffer the very same medical and emotional symptoms as the UFO contactees. What exactly are these symptoms that he is talking about, and is this documented?
Yeah, it's documented in various ways through government investigations, medical investigations. And what he's saying, he doesn't give any examples right there, but in my overall research, because I went back and looked at that quote, in my overall research, and again, the Air Force book that came out in 1969 says that there are these experiences of UFO sightings and encounters are very much like demonic possession. And what they're talking about there, I think, is that you've got people who suffer from psychological and mental breakdowns. So you've got people who claim they are being abducted. They have, it's interesting, you don't really see people who are abducted or who are even contactees where this ends up being a positive thing for them. People who are abducted, if you watch UFO movies, even there's almost always negative. So they suffer. They have in both the abduction and people who suffer from demonic oppression or whatever you want to call it, even possession. They're paranoid. They suffer from what we would normally consider something like schizophrenia or something where you have a mental illness. And there's also physical harm. So people who have claimed to have been close by a UFO or an orb or something like that can develop cancer. They can develop burns, radioactive type burns that you would expect from, radiation, blindness, problems with the eye, conjunctivitis. This even happens with Mothman. So even with these kind of cryptid encounters, people would develop these instances of conjunctivitis where their eyes would swell and become very bloodshot and things. And so you have changing of your views. You have all kinds of these weird medical issues, both with the abduction, close encounter experiences, as well as people who say they're being oppressed by demons.
What has the medical response or the medical academy what has the medical academy's response to these kinds of symptoms and phenomena related to both demon possession and alien abductions be, or have they commented at all?
They don't comment a lot because they don't like it. If you look at books, I'm reading one now on the trickster and the paranormal. Again, I don't think he's a Christian, but isn't it interesting? They refer to these beings as tricksters and deceivers. The academic community hates this stuff. I mean, they absolutely hate it. In fact, the book I'm reading says you're not going to find very many university departments about parapsychology or these kind of things, or paranormal. You might have a professor or whatever doing this kind of like I'm doing here and there, but you're not going to have like a department on parapsychology or the paranormal, because it's seen to be, there's still a stigma. There's still a stigma about all this. So we try to make it more and more palatable from a rational point of view. For example, in 1947, we see the description of these things as flying saucers. Well, the term flying saucer became very pejorative, where people who were crazy or drunk or whatever saw these flying saucers. Well, guess who coined the term UFO? The military. The military coined the term UFO to make it less weird, to make it less pejorative. Guess who coined the new term, UAP? The military. The military coined that term as well, or people working with the military actually on the UAP task force. So they're trying to make this more acceptable, but it's not acceptable yet in the medical field or in the academy. So what they do say is they want to reduce this to some kind of just a mental phenomena like schizophrenia or something like that. For example, we have the encounter. One of my favorite examples of UFO encounters is the Rendlesham Forest event in December of 1980, and very, very well accounted for, attested sighting. One of the persons there developed heart problems, gum problems, and the Air Force had problems. Actually, his medical records became top secret, and the Air Force denied he was even in the Air Force during that time for a while. It took going to Senator John McCain at the time to get his records released, so they wanted to keep this tight-lipped. There's not a lot on it. When they do talk about it, it's not very clear, at least not what I've seen in my own personal research. It's still very much seen as a, it's still, the stigma is still there.
I see. Yeah, I can see that happening. And I think that people like me have contributed like that because honestly, I've been skeptical of this for a while. I'm opening the door to it, like trying to open my mind to it, seeing
Yeah.
that it is a real possibility. Speaking with scholars like you and stuff have helped that. Now, there is this thesis assumes that only evil spiritual forces are interacting and impersonating UFOs and aliens. But what about good or spiritual, good spiritual forces? Like in the Christian, you mentioned
Like angels.
the
Yeah.
angels, and stuff like that. Good angels, you would say. Could they be interacting with our world and we are mistaking them with the UFO and these such events?
On the one hand, I don't think we can rule that out completely and to say there's no possibility. If there is something about angelic phenomena that would somehow give the impression of a UFO or something like that, I don't think we can necessarily rule it out. But again, most of the time we have these UFO encounters, they're very dark, they're very anti-Christian, and they bring on these very poltergeisty, paranormal things, phenomena that are very just honestly just satanic and very, very dark. So I think the examples that we see here are more clearly aligned with the demonic than the angelic. I mean, the demons are just an evil species of angels. So I don't want to say there's no possibility that we can maybe see a UFO and it really be an angel, but it seems like the whole phenomena taken as a whole is more aligned with deception. I mean, you've got non-Christians by the, I don't even know the number, Valet and Keel and these guys who are saying these whatever these things are very deceptive. Angels aren't deceptive. They want to point toward Christ, and this phenomenon wants to point away from him. So I would tend to say no, but I'm not going to say 100% no.
Got it. Okay, before the last questions that I have for you, Dr. Huffling, I have one controversial question, and I'm going to ask it, and if you'd like, we can cut this out or not. But I don't know. Are you a Catholic?
No,
No?
I'm Protestant.
Okay.
I teach for Southern Evangelical Seminary. We do like the overall philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, and we're Thomistic in a very general way with his overall general philosophy, but not in a specific theology regarding things like soteriology and hamartiology. So, no, thoroughgoing evangelical Protestant.
All right. And my question is because, well, for example, I know that here in Mexico and in Spain, for example, which is also a very Catholic country,
right,
there are a lot of phenomena attached to Catholic saints and Catholic imagery.
Right.
And for example, here in Mexico, we have the story about I don't know how to say in English, the Virgin of Guadalupe.
Yes, that comes out a lot, actually, in ufological studies. Jacques Vallée discusses that account in great detail, actually, in his literature.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is controversial because, I mean, for example, Mexico is a really, really Catholic country, and some Protestant, some Protestant teachers and denominations would say that the events or the experiences of people who are Catholic with appearances of saints like the Virgin Mary or any other saint who point the attention towards them and not towards Christ, could be attributed to this demonic realm. And I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, that's not outside the realm of possibility if they are actually taking the attention away from the true God and the true Christ and putting it on something else. I do know, not in a lot of detail, but that in Latin American Catholicism, there's a lot of superstition and a lot of variation of beliefs there. It's interesting that Vallée and others take these examples, like you just mentioned, with the Virgin Mary, and put that in the overall box of and category of these kinds of extraterrestrial or paranormal sightings. Keel does that with Paul on the road to Damascus, actually, when he sees Christ on the road to Damascus. he says that Keel says this is the exact same kind of thing we see with people nowadays with their sightings. So they put all that in the same box. I would say, and this even becomes a more specific question, not just to all the paranormal, but even just to theology between Catholics versus Protestants. What is the point of all these divisions and the saints and everything? And I think it's at least possible that if you have something like that that is taking attention off Christ and drawing people away from that and putting it on something else, then it could be. I don't know enough about the specific instances as to why. But I will say there have been people who have become Christians through it too, which is also weird. People have seen the Virgin, claiming to have seen the Virgin Mary in these different instances, especially in South America, that I've read about, and they have become, from what I understand anyway, more Christian or being brought to Christ. So I don't know how to explain that either. It's hard to know what is being reported, how accurate it is, and how truthful it is, and that kind of thing. So you got to be really careful with that too.
Has there been any official response from the Catholic Church to all of these events, or like pushback and saying no, the appearance of the Virgin Mary was the Virgin Mary, not a UFO
I
or
think
something like that?
On a case-by-case basis, they are open. I think in that specific case, I think, I could be wrong on this, that they are open to these actually being miraculous events. I'll have to go back and look again at each case. But in some cases, I do think that they believe these are miraculous and legitimate events. Trying to think, I just lost my train of thought. Yeah, at least in some cases, they are seen to be that way, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Now, just drawing to a close, going back at the beginning of our interview, you've gotten yourself involved in these kinds of investigation and research. You mentioned that when people got involved in this, they opened the door to the supernatural and paranormal, and it could be dangerous for people. How have you maintained protected, or how do you know that you're protected towards against this kinds of things?
That's a great question. I thought about that actually. I thought about where is the line with studying this, and where is the door? And I don't want to go knocking on that door. It seems that the door is not just through doing research, but it is trying to seek out an experience. But that's the case. That's not the case with everybody, because you have some people, like I know people who have seen UFOs and they weren't looking for it. They weren't knocking on some door somewhere. They just had an experience. Now, Keel is an example, I think, of somebody who had a lot of weird paranormal things happen to him while he was doing the investigation and the experience. I think, though, as long as you are really trying to wrap yourself in Christ and stay in prayer and the Word and everything, you have spiritual insulation from all this. I don't know if it's a guarantee. It's not a guarantee, I don't think, but I try not to seek out the experiences. Like, I don't want to go play with a Ouija board or anything. Now, I do talk to people who are of different faiths and views and things. I just try not to go down that path. I try to keep it at a research level for the church, because I don't think the church, I think you mentioned this earlier on in the interview, is not doing a lot on this because they think for various reasons they're either scared of it or they think it's crazy or whatever. So I don't think the church is doing a lot of work on the paranormal like it should be, and there's a lot of interest, especially now for whatever reason. So I've made some of my work and YouTube channel on this geared toward that, and so I try to keep it Christ-centered as well.
Are you alone on this, or do you have like a team that's helping you out and keeping you centered or something like that?
As far as keeping me centered, I have people I talk to. I have a good friend of mine who I work with. He's very much in Bigfoot. He went to Mothman Festival with me. He's a good friend of mine. I'll talk to him almost on a daily basis about things. We're not on a team for the YouTube channel or anything or this work, but we do bounce ideas off each other and talk to each other. I have a team at Worldview Media who helped me with all my the graphics and everything. I talked to them about this kind of stuff. I talked to one of my friends who's a former student, and so I have a close knit of friends I will talk to about things if I need to. But yeah, not a team per se in a sense of being like on the same research.
Not like Ghostbusters.
Yes. Yeah, more of a close network of friends. Yeah.
I see. How has your church responded to this kind of research? Because, for example, again, if here in Latin America, if you start talking about these stuff, everybody raises a red flag and say, "No, don't speak about that. That's demonic. Don't get involved in that at all." How has your church responded?
I go to a relatively big church, and so there are a few people I think who are aware that I'm doing this, especially now that I've been posting it. I've started my YouTube channel on this. I have a couple channels. One is based just on this. It's called the Mysterian Files, and some people see it at my church and they like it and they think it's good work. I haven't had anybody tell me that it's dangerous or shouldn't be doing it yet. Although I'm sure there are people like that who think that I might get that in the future. I think so far it's been pretty positive.
I see. All right. Well, it's a two-part question for the audience mainly. What would be your guidance or your principles to people that are interested in this subject to protect themselves, to not open doors and get into the dangerous part of these kinds of research?
Right.
And what books or authors would you recommend for this research?
Okay. Yeah, and again, it's interesting that even non-Christians are saying you better be careful. John Keel, for one, is saying that you don't want to mess with this. If you're a young person, teenager, or you're gullible, or you're easily sucked in, stay away from it because it can destroy you. I mean, people have been destroyed because of this kind of stuff. It depends on, as far as the authors, it depends on what you're interested in. There's lots of different facets of this. I'm working on a blog and probably a video, at least on my website blog, about what resources you can get. As far as Christian resources, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men is a good book. The Truth About UFOs by Ron Rhodes is good. Joe Jordan's Piercing the Cosmic Veil is very good. And I would start there. I'm doing my own work, but I haven't anything on in print yet. And just don't seek out the experiences. Stay away from these spiritual. The Bible says don't go chasing after spirits. Don't go talking to the dead. We shouldn't go buy a Ouija board or shouldn't go to a psychic and try to get a readings done or engage in astrology or that kind of thing. So just follow the Bible and try to stay away from that. But I would encourage people to stay with reputable academic sources. If you're wanting this general information in ufology, Jacques Vallée, John Keel, J. Allen Hynek are good guys to stay with. They're not Christian, but they'll give you. They're the top researchers now. And I'll have a list of things coming out on my website soon, hopefully. But yeah, there's a few.
All right. Very well. Dr. Huffling, it has been a wonderful interview. I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your research. As you mentioned, it's something that the church hasn't done enough, and your work is really helping us to get interested in this. Thank you.
Thank you.